So I want to start off by showing you guys what a render looks like when we just add a bunch of samples with the default settings with what we have. This render here took a mere hour and 1 minute, and it's still very, very grainy. So that's obviously not ideal, no matter where you are. Even if you have a farm, that is way too much time to be rendering out one effects element. Oh, and by the way, the holdout doesn't work properly because we still have that showing up in our alpha. So, you know, Karma and Mantra have always kind of had this issue of things being a little bit complicated, more so than necessary probably, and also taking a really, really long time. And that's my biggest critique of Mantra. You know, in my case, I'm rendering this entire project out with one computer. I don't have a farm. I could try to pay for grid markets or for, some sort of render farm situation, but you shouldn't have to rely on a render farm just to get out a 10-second sequence. And I'm sure most of you watching don't have either the money or the PC to really crank this out in a reasonable time frame. So what I'll say is this. You could try doing this without the volume limits going to 2. It will make this look less impressive in some ways, or I guess it will take away from the quality of this, I should more accurately say, because all of this interesting lighting information that's in here is happening because we have a volume limit above 0. But, what should we do? Well, let's see if we can make this work with XPU. Okay, to switch this over to XPU, start with the materials. For Pyro shaders, we need to rely on the XPU Pyro Preview. Now, in the future, side effects probably will have dedicated shaders just for XPU or something like that into the future. So if you're watching this after this was recorded, do double check on that. But at the moment, your only option for rendering volumes with XPU is going to be with this. So that surface is going to go to a collect, and we're going to name this our XPU Pyro Collect. Going to copy that, and we're going to assign it down here. Now, for our terrain, we also need to use a Material X standard surface, which is what we're doing right now. So that's actually good to go. As soon as we have that, go down to the Karma, and we will change the rendering engine here to XPU. Now do keep in mind that volume lights are not going to work with XPU. So you're out of luck there. And on top of that, if we go to our limits, we no longer have the ability to add in volume limits. Again, as this goes on, this might change, but for right now, you can't actually bounce around the indirect rays within your volume. So once we have that, let's go ahead and restart Karma. And it's going to freak out. Now, what it's going to say here is that, well, we don't have some sort of supported type. Now, if we pause this, go back into the material library, this probably has to do with our bindings in the Pyro shader. So for the fire volume, let's set that to flame. Secondary is also going to be flame, and we do have a scatter volume right there. Go ahead and restart the render, and we actually should have a much better result. Let's start off by taking the density here to 40. See if it's even showing up as a material assignment. And sure enough, it is. Okay, now as we work on this, I want to pause this and get rid of the terrain so that this goes much more quickly. So pause it right there. And we can go up here to our scene import and remove the terrain just by reselecting all this stuff. There we go. Restart, and now that's much faster. on this material, we can actually copy some of the settings that we had with the original Pyro shader, but you'll notice that we're very limited as to how to control the values on this Pyro shader right here. So I'm going to copy over the smoke color that we had before. Let's go ahead and copy this, paste it into the absorption, and then turn it a bit more yellow, right around there. Maybe give it a bit more saturation if we like. Something right about there is fine. And then with the shadow density, I'll say 1.7. And the scattering phase is going to be 0.35. For the scatter, we can turn this up, and we're going to need a lot of juice to get this showing through. So add a couple zeros, maybe even one more right there. And we can also enable the mask. Let's take the mask center to 0.1. And as we turn up the mask width, we should be able to bring that further and further out. But I think for right now, let's keep our mask width around a value of 9, mask center at 1. Okay, so we basically have really simple controls for smoke, scatter, and fire. The issue with fire is that if we turn this up to, let's say, a really high value, and we isolate that, like this, it's not going to really look at all the same as to what we had before, because the ramp did a lot of work in the original shader. So you could try enabling a mask here as well, but I think what that means is that we need to really think about modifying the values that are going into fire, scatter, and smoke from the SOP level. So if we're using XPU, then that basically means to get the same thing as we had over here, we need to add in all these ramps. We need to multiply our original values by, the colored tints of CD. Unfortunately, a lot of this data is not going to be available to you with XPU. So you might think, okay, well, we can go to our object level and use a pyrobake volume to bake out all this information, add in our ramps. However, what we're affecting here is not the VDB values themselves. It's affecting the shader, or what we see in the viewport. So if we do that and we go back to our stage, there will be no difference at all. We actually have to change the VDB values themselves to see any effect here with XPU. So this is mostly an issue with the flame field, and the biggest difference is going to be getting this ramp working properly. So it's not too bad. All we need to do is create a volume wrangle and create a few ramps that we'd like to use for flame and density. So starting with flame equals to a channel ramp, or I guess we'll multiply that times equals a channel ramp. This will be called our flame ramp. And then we will take flame as the incoming value. So as soon as I do that, we should see that now we have this going on. To see everything, go to the volume visualization. We can set this up. And in the emission here, let's set that to flame. Maybe, there we go, something like that. And then we're going to also use flame for the emission color field. Okay, so as I bring this down, like that, and like this, we can create something similar to what we had before in our Pyro shader. And same deal goes for the density. I created this, which is a ramp for density, and we've set it to be this right here. Because we normalized all those values, we don't have to worry about going past 1 a whole lot. So this ought to work for pretty much what we had before. Okay, so with that all in mind, let's now go back to the stage, back here, and restart the render. Okay, obviously we have a lot less density going on, so we'll probably need to turn that up fair bit. 250. Go 400. Yeah, maybe something like that. I think actually we are getting a bit too aggressive with that ramp, so we can turn that down. But let's check the fire as well. If I add a 0 to that, now we have our fire doing what it should do along here. And that's awesome. Maybe add one more 0, and there we go. Well, a little bit less. So yeah, right about there. Add in the scatter. Then we'll go back to change our density ramp here in a second. So back to the object level. Here is our density ramp towards the bottom. Let's go ahead and be a little less crazy about that. Right around there. And just to check to make sure that all of our values are working nicely, let's use a volume slice and set this to density to get an idea of where these values are. Geo spreadsheet, and it looks like the values going into that wrangle are already at about 0.55. So let's just take our ramp about halfway through, like this, and that ought to work just fine. Okay, and that does the trick. I would like to also have a ramp on this glow, or the scatter, that is. So pause it one more time, and I'll add that in here on this wrangle. So something about there for that scatter. As soon as I do that, let's go back to the stage, see where things are at. Restart the render. Okay, and I think that's much better. Let's go ahead and try frame 34 real quick towards the beginning of the explosion and see what's going on here. Yeah, we're definitely blowing that out. So I'm going to remove a 0 from just about everything on the scatter and the fire. Also, I think our density could go up from here a little bit as well. So let's try a value of maybe about 600. All right, and that looks pretty good. In the next video, let's talk about the render settings for Karma XPU.